This administration began amid a dark time in America. As Jim said, a once-in-a-century pandemic, devastating joblessness, clear and present threats to democracy and the rule of law, doubts about America's future itself. And yet, we've not wavered, we've not flinched, and we've not given in. Instead, we're delivering results for the American people.
More from President Biden as he signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. Former President Barack Obama celebrated, tweeting, "This is a BFD." That's funny. A reference to Biden's infamous hot mic moment when Obamacare was signed into law. He was just being really supportive and just flashed a little F-bomb by mistake. Joining us now, Columbia University professor, economist, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs. I'm so interested, Dr. Sachs, in hearing your thoughts on this legislation, what the benefits are, and maybe what some challenges, what some criticism you might have for it.
Could I say it's an SFD, maybe? It's
Sure.
It's a small, okay, it's presidential way of speaking, of course. It's a small step in the right direction. It's not historic. It reflects where our country is, which is nearly paralyzed. This was a straight party vote in both houses to take some very small steps compared to what was talked about, for example, at the beginning of the Biden administration. It makes some steps forward on containing drug prices, some modest steps. It takes some steps forward on climate, which is somewhat amazing, but they're not large steps. There's no overarching plan. And there are some tax credits that are offered for the right things, for turning to green energy. So I would definitely have voted for this, but we should be clear that, boy, we're still stuck. We're unable to do big things in this country. So when we do small things, we celebrate them in a very big way. Maybe that's fair enough, but we're not really making breakthroughs on the health cost crisis. We're not really making breakthroughs on climate policy. We're taking some small steps. One of the things, Mika, that's notable is that basically all the things that cost money, where the government was going to make investments, those are pretty much out of this legislation, because what the Democrats did, Sinema and Manchin, they said, you're not raising taxes in any significant way. And the result is a pretty small piece of legislation, but at least it's there. Maybe that's how we could put it.
Well, Dr. Sachs, we've had quite a few people refer to the climate part of this legislation as sweeping, one of the biggest investments ever in reducing climate change. You look at the numbers, where it's going to take the United States, moving it far closer to the Paris targets. Isn't that something to celebrate?
You know, it's the first piece of legislation that actually goes in the right direction, basically for 30 years. So you could celebrate that. But all these headlines are a big exaggeration. It says reduce the emissions by 40%. Well, the study that proposes that shows that even without the legislation, the emissions go down in that model by 27%. So what's coming out of this legislation is much smaller than the headline. And then if you read the fine print, which I have to do for a living, and I have it in front of me, it says that non-financial challenges may constrain the pace of real-world deployment relative to modeled results. Now, that's a lot of jargon to say. There's probably exaggerated what's being claimed for this, because you need a plan, not just some tax credits. Where are you going to put the solar fields, the wind towers? Where are the transmission lines? All the policy side is gone because Manchin blocks the policy side on climate change. We don't have a functioning policy plan for this country. So yes, it's progress. It's definitely progress, but it's small. And if it becomes, well, you've already done that, then we're going to be disappointed down the road as usual.
Let's talk
Yep.
about the impact on prices. Democrats probably got this bill passed because, in part, they called it the Inflation Reduction Act. Is that just a marketing tool, or will it have an impact on prices coming down?
Completely marketing tool. This is that was a title that seemed to work better than Build Back Better, and so they went with that. But the inflation we're experiencing now is not addressed at all in this legislation. There are perhaps some cost containments down the road in a few years on some drug prices, which will be helpful. But basically, this isn't about inflation reduction. That's marketing, because we have inflation. Where's the inflation coming from? From the dislocations in the world economy, and the Fed back in 2020 pumping up the money supply in response to the pandemic and the other dislocations. And now we have the war, the sanctions, we have the tensions with China. We've really ginned up a bit of a mess, and this legislation doesn't address that at all. So that's just a title. It's not really about inflation reduction. It may have some tiny effects down the road, but nothing substantial. I mean, nothing real about our current inflationary challenges.
Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, always a ray of sunshine coming in through the windows.
But good morning to everybody.
Every morning. How are we doing, Ukraine? Terrible. How is this sweeping bill? Terrible.
Well, what can one say?
Well, what you just said. All right. Thank you so much, Ron.
Good to see
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it,
see
Dr. Sachs.
Oh.
Yeah, you know, we do bring Dr. Sachs on from time to time to tell us just how grim things
Morning
are.
Joe, wet blanket.
I will say that that does not, just from everything I've read, especially on climate and on some other areas, that certainly does not seem to be the consensus of most experts who have talked about how this is sweeping, especially in the climate area. And that's not just Democrats, that's not just American journalists, that's people across the world.
Yeah, but it's also about what can be done politically, and that in that sense, this was quite an achievement.
In a 50-50 Senate, in an evenly divided House, sweeping changes, especially given how divided right now we are as a country and how divided we are in Congress.